In this video, we're going to study another type of inductive argument, the argument from analogy. When we point out an observed similarity between two things, or two types of things, we draw an analogy between them. When, on the basis of analogies, we conclude that items similar in observed ways are also similar in some further, yet unobserved way, we employ an argument from analogy, also known as an analogical argument. Of course, it's not the case that every time we give an analogy, we're giving an analogical argument. We still need to have all the other things that arguments need present, premises and conclusions, that is. But when our premises are pulling on a similarity between things and we're drawing an analogy, then we've got an analogical argument. Arguments from analogy can be stated in various ways, but many of them can be reconstructed to exhibit the following form. Premise 1. Objects of type X have properties F, G, H, and so on. Premise 2. Objects of type Y have properties F, G, H, and so on, and also an additional property, Z. Therefore, conclusion, objects of type X have property Z as well. The basic idea of what's going on here is, look, we've got X, and it's got all these properties. Y has a bunch of similar properties that we know about. We know they both share F, G, H, and so on. And we also know that Y has this additional property, Z. By analogy, we infer that X also probably has that same property, Z, as well. So think about the example we had earlier where hormones were tested on birth control. Hormones were tested on female rats, and conclusions were drawn about female humans. In the one case, the female rats could be type Y, and we say, hey, they share certain physiological properties with humans, and they also had the property of being affected by the hormones in a certain sort of way. So when Marion Diamond concluded that human females are type X also probably had the property of being affected by birth control hormones in a certain sort of way, she was drawing an analogical conclusion based on the similarities between the female rats and female humans. And this is the basic motivation behind the animal testing we do. We assume the physiological similarities between animals and ourselves will provide some kind of reasonable guide as to how we'll react to things. Questions of the morality of animal testing aside. The strength of an analogical argument depends heavily on the relevance of the similarities mentioned in the premises to the similarities stated in the conclusion. One feature is relevant to another if the presence of the first increases, that is positively relevant to, or decreases, that is negatively relevant to, the probability that the second feature will also be present. So your book gives the example of a car. So two cars having the same color isn't very relevant to how durable or trustworthy the cars are. It's just not the type of feature that's going to be positively relevant to, or even negatively relevant to, the probability that a car will be durable. The similarity in color is not relevant. But it is going to be relevant if we're talking about something like aesthetic appeal. The degree of relevant similarity between the objects mentioned in the premises and the conclusion is also important in judging the strength of analogical arguments. Obviously, the greater the degree of relevance between the two objects being compared, the stronger the analogical argument will be. Thus, one may think that it's a stronger case that humans will react to a certain way to a certain sort of drug if it's been tested on chimpanzees than if it was tested on rats, because chimps are a lot more similar to us than rats are. Arguments that have the form of analogical reasoning but fail to meet the standards for strong analogical arguments are fallacies. Some fallacious arguments attempt to establish a conclusion on the basis of irrelevant analogies. So, for example, If we conclude that Joan is lazy because her brother John is, we've made an argument from analogy that doesn't meet the standards for good analogical reasoning. This is because one sibling being lazy is not very relevant to the likelihood that another sibling will be. It's really common in families to have lazy siblings and hard-working siblings. The correlation's just not there. The 19th century British philosopher John Stuart Mill referred to this as the fallacy of false analogy. So in short, arguments from analogy are a useful tool to help us reason through things, used in all sorts of fields, from archaeology to legal reasoning to moral reasoning. But you got to make sure that the analogies are actually good ones in order to avoid fallacious reasoning.